As of now, the U.S. government partial shutdown is not affecting the country's Supreme Court, though it might in a few weeks. The court returned to the bench today to start its new term, not only discussing a whole bunch of new cases, but there's a new dynamic among the justices. Joining us now from Washington, D.C. is attorney Horace Cooper. He is senior fellow at the National Center for Public Policy Research and is a contributor to Arise America. Horace, welcome to Xchange.
Thanks for having me on the program.
So let's start with the court, and this could be a big year for business issues with the Supreme Court. What are some of the cases we're looking at?
Well, you got several cases that are going to be coming before the Supreme Court. You got some cases involving the rights of unions and negotiations with company heads. You've got whistleblower legislation that's coming forward. There's a really big case involving the right of banks to decide whether or not they're going to foreclose on properties or loan on properties, and whether or not those loan arrangements and agreements have impact on race relations, or at least on a racial basis.
Horace, go ahead, Horace. I'm sorry.
I'm sorry. No, I was just going to say that I just think that there are a lot of exciting and interesting cases.
Will you say that the Roberts Court, and specifically Roberts himself, the Chief Justice, is looking to make this court, and I'll use the phrase, more business friendly and possibly reduce the burden of regulations on businesses?
Well, I'm not sure I would characterize it quite that way, but I think that's a close way to look at it. It certainly is the case that the justices bring their past experiences to the court. Justice Thomas used to be the chairman of the EEOC, and it informs his opinions and basis for writing about issues involving civil rights. Mr. Roberts was a skilled counselor representing a number of corporate clients, and that probably still impacts and informs his ability. It is increasingly the case, Justice Powell, who was appointed by Mr. Nixon and brought to the court because of his business acumen, it influenced him. Justice O'Connor, finally, is another example of someone who brought her Federalist perspective and influenced the court dramatically because she had been a state legislator before she became a judge.
And Horace, last year we saw the Supreme Court sort of pull back on some of workers' rights issues, if you will, regarding rights to sue. Do you see more of a pattern of that happening here?
Well, it will depend on the case, but I will tell you this court is probably going to look a lot more skeptically at these types of claims generally. However, there's a countervailing effect that's going to be taking place. The Solicitor General has a lot of sway with the Supreme Court. As an Obama appointee, that Solicitor General may be able to steer the court in a different direction.
Well, that's very interesting because the court is often deferential to the executive branch.
And certainly when those arguments are put forward, the Solicitor General is someone that they look for guidance.
Let me ask you a bigger issue here. We have 50 years right now of pretty much the Congress running rampant over the Commerce Clause, which is supposed to rein in Congress. Are we going to start seeing this court define the Commerce Clause once again and start striking down some of where Congress may have overstepped its bounds?
Well, if Justice Thomas has his way, the answer is definitely yes. He is probably one of the justices on the court who has clearly defined constitutional parameters and isn't satisfied with the precedents that were established before he came on the court. His test is this something the framers contemplated, not did 30, 40, or 50 years ago, did a consensus develop on the court?
And what about, Horace, regarding regulations? Because there's always been this concern, especially in recent years, that regulations, which are not necessarily passed by Congress, by federal agencies, have no oversight at all. Do we see cases that the Supreme Court is going to take on that are going to pull back some of those regulations?
Well, you know, that's an interesting perspective because it looks like it's more of the progressives on the court, say someone like Justice Ginsburg, who used to sit on the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals, who dealt with the panoply of cases that arose from these sort of regulations that were issued, because most of them come from Washington, D.C. She's likely to carry a great degree of sway with the rest of the justices. Now, I want to remind your audience, as much as we talk about the contentiousness that exists on the court, the overwhelming majority, some 60% last year alone of cases were actually decided unanimously. It is a very small number of the cases that end up being a 5-4 or 4-5 majority.
Well, that's a very interesting point, but it is those slim cases that get all the news and sort of make the sea change here. And with Sandra Day O'Connor, who was sort of the middle person on the court for a long time, that's shifted now to Justice Kennedy. Where do you see Justice Kennedy coming down on some of these issues regarding businesses and Commerce Clause and the power of the federal government to regulate business?
Well, I'll give you a good example. There's going to be another campaign finance case that's coming forward this year. I predict it's probably going to be written by Justice Kennedy, and it's probably going to push back against the restrictions on campaign finance. He has been a fairly big champion of free speech. There's an affirmative action case involving the state of Michigan and whether or not they have the legal authority to engage in those kinds of outreach efforts. I imagine that's another case where he's going to be the deciding vote. Justice Thomas will probably stake out a fairly strong and clear position, but he too.
I'm going to have to wrap you up. Thank you so much, Horace Cooper. And you are
Thank you.
watching Arise Exchange. See you tomorrow.